Sounding good.
I really couldn't tell you though. That's just the nature of everybody's brain injury is like a little different,
Yeah.
you know. So like, I can give you a historical breakdown of the Norman invasion of England in 1066. You ask me what I had for breakfast, I got nothing.
The non-important
Yeah.
stuff you don't need. Tell me about where did all this brain damage come from? Because it sounds like you obviously know about the damage of brain damage and how severe it is. What have you
mine's
been
not
put through?
particularly severe because I didn't fight for that long. I was only fighting actively from 93 through 97, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So but of course you have to take into account that was back in the day when the training and everything was a lot more physical. Like you gotten people now that people are recognizing the potential for brain injury and concussion, and CTE and things like that. You know, they tend to stay away from hard sparring. You know, I was back old school, man. I was joined at the hip with Saul Solis. So for any of the guys that know anything about like old school MMA, you know, Saul was probably best known for being Tito's striking coach back in the day. He was on a couple of seasons of Ultimate Fighter as one of the coaches and trainers. He was my best friend for 30 plus years. We were joined at the hip. But back in the day, it was no mercy on sparring. It was just like, you know, the whole purpose was to beat you down just to see if you were going to last.
Yeah.
You know, and good Lord, all those days on the tennis courts at Denver Harbor, just getting the crap kicked out of me by, you know, all manner of thugs and ruffians and, you know, shook up.
See if you can hang.
Yeah, so.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest today. I know him from the MMA community. He's been around as long as I have. He's an announcer now with Excite Fight at Rick Little Show. He's got his YouTube show, Sunday Sermon, you can find on YouTube. There's going to be a lot more that we're going to learn about him, but this is the Reverend Bart Stewart.
How we doing, guys?
Thanks for coming by.
Hey, man, thanks for having me on. Mm-hmm. It's always an honor and a pleasure. I really like the work that you do. And El, man, just calling your fights and seeing you just around the scene, you've always been like a really class act. So, you know, when you gave me the invite, I'm like, oh hell yeah, man.
Cool.
You know, try to keep me away. I dare you.
Yeah. And so I've been tuning in every now and again to your Sunday sermons, and you go deep into kind of what the news isn't telling us and what social media and big media isn't telling us, and kind of pull back the curtain on current events and kind of the backstories on everything that's happening with society. And I think that's huge. And because you really never know what's true these days, and with how much everything's ramping up.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I think the only political thing I can remember is they stopped school so everybody could watch like Obama being elected.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, a black president, cool. Yeah. But it wasn't like didn't know any of his policies. That we didn't know anything that the president actually did for the people, because how it was for us growing up was no matter what they did, it's not going to affect you. You still got to go to work. You still got to do this, still got to do that. But now these big things are impacting people on our level, and it's love it or hate it, but we're really being affected by the man and the government, and it sucks being so helpless and not even knowing what's going on most of the time.
Helplessness is relative, man. Helplessness is relative. I mean, you know, and this is a thing that, and I'm glad that you brought up the thing about, because that's an aspect of my personality. The guys that know me from the shows and stuff, they don't really know the political and social commentary and stuff that I've been into. They haven't seen that side of my personality, so I appreciate you giving me a chance to put that out there. With regard to helplessness, I say this all the time on the sermon. It's the world can be as messed up as it needs to be. Your world only has to be as messed up as you let it, right? There are some things that are consistently going to be out of our control. We have no control over the fact that we have a cadaver in the Oval Office who has sent 150 billion of our tax dollars to a corrupt autocrat butcher in Ukraine, telling us that he's defending democracy, you know, while he's locking up preachers and shutting down churches and silencing all radio opposition. We're defending democracy. We've got no effect on that. But we can take things in our own hands with regard to how much we decide to let those events. Now, again, once it gets to a certain level, if it comes down to World War III, guess what? We're all affected. There's very little we can do about that. And in that sense, I guess we are helpless. But we don't have to allow our lives to be so consumed by all the stuff that's going on around us. And I fall into that trap myself because, again, that's just, it's my wheelhouse. Politics and history and hidden aspects of history, that's my professional sports. You know what I mean? Like I watch the debates and I watch the midterms with the same fervor that a lot of people watch the Super Bowl or the March Madness. So, I mean, that's kind of my wheelhouse. And it does get overwhelming. It really does get overwhelming. A difference, you brought up the generational difference, like when they brought everybody in to watch, Obama's inauguration. I'll take it way back because I got probably 30 years on you. Back in the day, it was a lot easier to control the narrative because, when I was young, there were literally only 3 major TV networks. You had ABC, CBS, NBC. That was it. If you had cable, eventually you had CNN. But if you could control those 4 media outlets, you could essentially control the narrative. Whatever you told the people, perception being 9/10 of reality, whatever you told the people, that's what they're going to see as the truth. Now, the good thing about the wide-ranging access to the internet is that you don't have to be content to be spoon-fed anymore. You can go outside the mainstream and go, you know what, this really doesn't add up to me. Let me check some other sources. I mean, they could try to lock that down as much as they want, and they do consistently. I mean, you see now that the hearings that came out, what they did with Twitter, before Elon bought the place, the FBI was working directly with them to censor things about the COVID pandemic and the shall we say malfeasance surrounding the 2020 election. When the government is working hand in hand with Mussolini had a word for that. That word was fascism. When the government is working hand in hand with industry, and big tech is an industry. Just because the government doesn't come in and shut down a news outlet, if they are working with a private outlet to shut down information, that is still stomping all over the First Amendment. And our founders were very smart people. Yes, they were, old white men and slave owners and all these things. Heroic men have heroic flaws. That's just a fact. But there is a reason why the First Amendment was the First Amendment. And there's also a reason why the Second was put in place right behind that. I think Jefferson, and it may be a misattributed quote, but Jefferson is known for saying that the beauty of the Second Amendment is that it would not, it wouldn't be needed until people came to take away the rest of them, And so that's where we're at. I'm an absolutist on free speech, by the way. That's just one of those things. Again, you guys didn't see this at the end, but I was asking Elijah at the start of this thing, is there anything you want me to stay away from? Because I will respect somebody's individual wishes for me to stay away from something if it's their program. I'm in your house. I live by your rules. But when a government entity or a corporate entity is, telling me you can't talk about that, fuck you. And
if anything, that means we should be talking about it the most.
Absolutely. Anytime that somebody comes down on something, whenever they're trying to forbid you from asking questions, that's when you need to be asking those questions. Case in point, Damar, Hamlin, the NFL player, he finally did an interview during the Super Bowl. Everybody knows what happened. There was an incident on the field. He collapsed. People wanted to ask the question, well, was he vaccinated? Oh my God, that's such an inappropriate question. Is it? Because, like 2 years ago, you wanted to know if I was vaccinated before I could get into a movie theater, but it's inappropriate for me to ask that now. They finally interviewed him. And I think if you haven't seen that interview, you need to check that out.
Is that the one with Michael Strahan?
Yeah. And he just basically, he was like, so what did the doctor tell you? I really don't want to get into that. Oh, okay. So, yes, I have questions, because how hard would it have been? Commotio cordis, that's what they told us, that thing where, you take an impact to the heart and it shakes up the rhythm and momentarily stops the heart. That's what they told us. That was the official explanation. They asked him point blank, how hard would it have been for him to just say, well, it was commotio cordis, that's what the doctor said. That wouldn't have been difficult at all. I mean, even if he couldn't have said the actual Latin words, that thing where you take a hit to the chest and your heart stops. I mean, it would have been easy to say that.
Right.
But he sat there, and I think it was the pause that was the most telling. He just, I really don't want to get into that. I have questions, you should ask those questions, no matter what it is. I don't care. Even if it's stuff that is insensitive, right? Because there is the tyranny of everybody knows, right? once you get into that consensus thinking, that's just mob mentality. That's ignorance. That's, we're not herd animals, and when they expect us to behave like herd animals, that's where we need to buck a little bit, because even a sheep, if you back it into a corner, will fight.
Yeah.
So.
So we kind of got you on at a good time. One thing I did want to bring up, and we'll just get it out there first, is these unidentified flying objects, or one of them they've called like the China spy balloon, simultaneously with all these trains randomly derailing with hazardous chemicals and killing birds and acid in the air, and these semi trucks flipping over spontaneously and releasing all this stuff into the air. Yeah. And so a lot of it seemed, and I'm very like on the wall, not on the wall, but like a bug on the wall as far as like how much research I do and my total grasp on the severity of stuff like this. But the classic, like, oh, look over here while everything's going on down here. And so I think we're at a great time to talk about something right now, because it's happening as we speak.
Right.
So what you
any
take
good
from all
any
that
good
stuff?
Magician, and what we understand is magician, guys like Doug Henning and those cats, they're not magicians, they're illusionists. And the biggest asset to an illusionist is that sleight of hand. It's distraction. Here we are over here. See, so if we pay attention to my hot assistant over here and that big rack that she's sporting, you're not going to see that I'm over here, like pulling the quarter from behind here. The media works like that. That I have a lot of Russian friends, that I've trained with a lot of Russians, on a lot of different aspects, whether it's hand-to-hand or weapons platforms, whatnot. Several of the Russians that are close to me survived the Soviet era, right? And the Soviet Union, for you youngsters out there, the Soviet era in Russia was very, very different than Putin's Russia. Russia under communism was a terrifying place to be. But the guys that I know that survived the Soviet era, they will tell you the one thing that they could count on, if there was any good thing about it, was that they knew that anything that came across the TV or the radio or the newspaper was government propaganda. They knew it. They could always read between the lines. The problem that we have as Americans is we have the exact same thing going on right now, only we think, some of us think and believe, that we're being fed objective information. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's all part of the propaganda ministry. And for you conservatives out there, yes, I'm talking about Fox too, okay? Because, sorry, anybody outside of Tucker on Fox, I could give a bucket of warm piss for the whole freaking lot of them. Fox is basically controlled opposition. All the rest of the Fox commentators are still behind the war in Ukraine. Hannity's still behind it. All the commentators are still behind the war in Ukraine. Tucker's the only one that's spoken out against it, Meanwhile, the supposed anti-war left, that Maddow guy over at MSNBC and the rest of the crew over there, that Stelter bitch before CNN fired him, they were all behind the Ukraine effort. It's all propaganda. It's all a push. As far as the balloons, the surveillance balloons, the quote unquote UFO stuff, that's classic. Look over here, look over here. What was the balloon a surveillance balloon? Obviously, the one that they shot down, the first one that they shot down over Myrtle Beach, that was obviously a surveillance balloon. But here's the kicker about that: you have to dig deeper. Okay, was it a surveillance balloon? Yeah, but the Chinese already have spy satellites in low Earth orbit. There is nothing that balloon would have given them that their satellites wouldn't have already picked up. So why do it? Poke somebody in the eye to let them know that we have a guy in the White House that's entirely compromised. And then you got to look further. Look at the timing of it, right? That was right on the eve of when Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was supposed to have a meeting with President Xi in China. So what better time to poke us in the eye and go, we own you, right? Again, everyone's speculation is as good as anyone else's. You're never going to have the whole truth, and that's about anything. We're never going to know exactly what happened on 9/11. We're never going to know exactly who was on the grassy knoll at Dealey Plaza. We're never going to know exactly, who put together what happened in Oklahoma City. We're never going to know. The one thing that you do know is that the official story is always bullshit. It's always propaganda, always. So whatever they're spoon feeding you, look outside of that. Beyond that, your speculation's as good as mine. I don't believe it's extra. I happen to believe in extraterrestrials. I do happen to believe that we have had contact with extraterrestrials. I just don't think this incident in particular has anything to do with extraterrestrials. I'm very, very hesitant to believe that. Also, you have Occam's razor, right? Whereas what Occam's razor, that principle is basically, when in doubt, it is the situation that requires the least speculation that is probably true, right? Never chalk up to conspiracy what can be explained away to incompetence, right? And there's a lot of that going on, but once it gets past a certain point, incompetence no longer covers it. The fact that right here in Washington State, and this is something that some of your viewers might not be aware of, since 2020, right here, just our state alone, we have had 40 incidents of railroad sabotage that have been investigated by the FBI. 40 right here in this state by itself since 2020. Again, this is my wheelhouse. Some people know sports statistics. I know this kind of stuff. We've had 40. And people have been sentenced, and the overwhelming majority of them have been left-wing activists, which is a nice way of saying communist, but we're not gonna throw out the C word. But they have received very, very light sentences. There was one incident that actually caused a derailment in Bellingham that spilled tens of thousands of gallons of fuel oil and hazardous chemicals. That person was sentenced to 12 months.
Whoa.
12 months in prison.
And nobody heard about it.
Right, and nobody heard about it. Right,
about
exactly. This is the first a lot of people hear about it, but feel free to Google it,
Wow.
And you've heard me on the sermon. I always tell you, I'm not a guru, man. Fact check me too. Fact check everything. Don't believe anything that somebody tells you. That's where they've gotten away from it. Like the hippie generation. Question authority, question authority. They don't question authority anymore because they are the authority. And they won't tolerate being questioned because they are the authority. Mm-hmm. People need to question that. That incident in Ohio, you could definitely make a case that it was sabotage. You could also just as easily make a case that the accident itself was a product of negligence or faulty equipment. So the only thing that you can guarantee is take a look at what happened after. The fact that they, instead of blowing it in place or trying to siphon off the chemical, you had essentially one tank of vinyl chloride that they were worried that it was going to blow, right? Had it blown, there wouldn't have been the vapor cloud, right? It would have been a very localized, contained explosion, right? Would have thrown shrapnel, but anybody who was in the evacuation area wouldn't have been affected by the explosion or the shrapnel. So why then drain it out into pools and spend days burning it off when they know the effects of vinyl chloride? I mean, that is the thing. You're burning off vinyl chloride. It's very volatile. It's very reactive. And those fumes go up and they bond with oxygen in the air to form what? Hydrochloric acid, which again rains down and contaminates the food supply, contaminates the groundwater. Some of the other tanks on there were phosgene. Phosgene was used as a chemical weapon in World War I. We're talking about really, really nasty stuff. But the fact that instead of blowing it in place or trying to siphon it off, they decided to burn it out slowly over days. I mean, that's freaking inexcusable. That's just insane. And predictably, you've got the corporate people running around trying to get people to sign no harm, held harmless waivers. Oh, you're really, really desperate right now. You're homeless and you're living in a motel and you really, really need money. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you sign off like 10 grand? 10 grand is like a final settlement and you're going to hold us harmless for the rest of it. And a lot of people are in a position where they can't help but take that. I mean, it's really, really sick what they're doing. How does that tie in with everything else? What do we know about the Midwest? Midwest is farm country. Midwest is the breadbasket. Well, now you've got a chemical vapor cloud affecting the water table all over the Midwest. Where is all our food coming from? Mm-hmm. Let alone all these mysterious accidents that are taking place at all these food processing facilities, let alone the bizarre nature of the egg shortage and what's coming out lately with, chicken farmers and egg farmers that, well, they stopped laying as soon as we started giving them this particular feed. There's plenty of stuff out there, for people to look into. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say that I have the answers. I certainly don't believe that there's some, secret council of 12, that even guys like Schwab and the World Economic Forum and things like that, do they have every intention of controlling the population? Of course they do. I mean, they state it outright. But how much power do they really have to do that? Not much. At the end of the day, here's my thought on conspiracies, man. Historically, if you know your history, money protects money, power protects power. No conspiracy required. And if you don't have money or power, well, you're pretty much left to your own devices. These are very moneyed, very powerful interests. What their end goal is, whether it's depopulation, whether it's social control, whether it's totalitarianism, authoritarianism, who knows? Again, your speculation's as good as mine, but you definitely need to be asking the questions. So, and that's where they want it all to stop. That's why they're clamping down so hard on the information, because what do you know about basic psychology? Stimulus response. If you control the stimulus, you control the response. If you control the perception, you control people's reality. And that's a very, very dangerous thing, because you and I both know people who are otherwise intelligent, right? Very, very sharp people, not easily led, not fearful, not your typical grazer, herd animal type person, who were persuaded that the vaccines would prevent transmission, who were persuaded that vaccine mandates were a good idea, who were persuaded that there was no malfeasance in the 2020 election, who were persuaded that that the Hunter Biden laptop was a fiction or was Russian disinformation. It's when you control people's perception, you control their reality. That's a very, very dangerous thing. So,
how'd you first get involved in all this? What kind of sparked your first interest in diving deeper into everything and learning so much about the government and politics and history? And what's your background in all this?
I've always been a history guy. I've always been a really, really devout Cold War history guy, because my high school days were right there at the ass end of the Cold War. That was the Reagan era. That's when the Russians were the Russians, dum dum dum. You had to have the dramatic music and everything. It was really, really scary, because we had a crazy cowboy in the White House. And let me qualify, I'd do anything to get that cowboy back right now. But we had a crazy cowboy in the White House with Ronald Reagan, and he was not to be trifled with. The Russians were a nuclear superpower, and they were not to be trifled with. We had proxy wars going on all over the world, and there was the constant specter that we could come to nuclear war, right? And it was a frightening time to be alive. And what I've always found throughout my life is that the more you know about something, the less you're afraid of it. So I went into a deep dive, and I started learning the history, and I started learning everything that I could about all things nuclear and everything like that. And I started developing a capacity and an understanding for history beyond my peers in high school. I was always the guy who's like, man, that weirdo Bart, man, he's always talking that crazy stuff. Yeah, and then it would come out that I was right. Oh my God, the crazy guy was right. But I'll tell you, the one that was really responsible for my awakening was Waco, because by that point in my life, I'd moved into, like early adulthood. I was a wake and bake stoner, just bong rips every freaking morning to get out of bed. And I was living in Houston at the time. And myself and a friend of mine, Johnny Von Bodman, who you'll see on my Facebook profile from time to time, we just heard, all we knew was that some federal agents were shooting it out with some Jesus freaks up in Waco. How far is Waco? That's a 2.5 hour drive. Cool, man. Let's go check it out. And we're smoking weed all the way up there. And we got up there, and let's just say that the news left out a few very important details. What I saw out there just from that first visit was utterly terrifying. the way that agents of the federal government had this roadblock set up that they were threatening people who were looking at the compound through spotting scopes, that I had an ATF agent basically tell me that he would shoot me dead on the spot if I got one step closer to the fence, kind of thing. Whoa. And I was like, what the hell did I just walk into, right? And so we spent a couple of days there in Waco, and I was talking to a lot of the locals, and a lot of the locals were saying these were upstanding people. Their kids were always well behaved. You know, they shopped with us at our stores. They had tables at the gun shows. The reason they had all these guns out there, it's called an inventory. These guys were FFL licensed dealers. I talked to the McLennan County Sheriff at the time, you know, and he even said, he was like, this is a travesty. And so we went up there 3 or 4 times while it was going on and just talking to the locals and things like that. And suddenly, you know, what I was getting from the people that lived there was totally different than what I was getting from the news. And it was really shocking. It was a hell of a wake up call. And then over the course of that, you know, the whole thing at Ruby Ridge, which had happened a year before up in this part of the world, had completely gotten past me, you know, when it happened again, because wake and bake stoner guy wasn't paying attention, and the news barely talked about that as well. And so I was, you know, hearing the parallels about what was going on with Waco and how that was tied into what had happened at Ruby Ridge. And it was an awakening for me, man. It was just like, oh my God, you know, I've been blind all this time. And part of that was willingly, you know, which let me just go ahead and throw this out here. I worked for years for the decriminalization of cannabis, just on principle, right? Having said that, I think if they, you know, whether it's the government, corporations, or whatever, wanted a way to dumb down and control and numb the population, you couldn't find a better way than pot. You know, in this day and age. I mean, you know, and that's no offense to anybody who can actually smoke weed on a daily basis and manage their affairs. I'm not that fucking guy. I'm not. But yeah, if you want a way to tranquilize people, there's no better way, you know, than to have them doing. I don't even know what the hell they call that stuff now. Shatter or what the hell ever. The
dabs.
Yeah, the dabs. Like, Jesus, man, come on, you know. But yeah, it was an awakening for me, and it wasn't too long after that I put down the bong. And then several years after that, I got involved in even harder drugs and took myself out of the equation for a couple of years, just because it got overwhelming. But that's really where the awakening came. And after that, nothing was the same. After that, I was doing deep dives, and you got to take into account that was 1993, man. That's like pre-internet, so I was having to go old school, like to the library and Dewey Decimal Systems, and I was having to meet with these guys, you know, who were generally kind of weirdos, but they had, oh man, you haven't seen this government document, you know, and here's a copy of the MJ-12, and I'm like, wow, you know, it was just a constant awakening. And I found that once I put the bong down, my brain was just starved for that information. I wanted to know everything, man. But you can't go too far. I gotta hit on the conspiracy people too, man. There is such a thing as going too far. You know, I always try to draw the distinction. You have the legit, plausible stuff. Reasonable questions. What happened to Building 7 at, you know, on 9/11? What happened to Building 7? Why did it pancake into its own footprint? You have reasonable questions like that. And then you have the David Icke nut job shit, which is, dude, it was holograms and there were no real planes and they loaded all the passengers onto one and crashed in Shanksville. It's like, bro, come on. You know, those people do a disservice. They do a disservice because you've got legit plausible arguments, like with the COVID thing, right? You've got legit plausible arguments that, you know, Pfizer knew that it was tied to myocarditis and pericarditis, that they knew that it was causing spontaneous abortions in pregnant women when they gave it to them. They knew all this is all plausible stuff, right? But then you had people at the beginning who were like, no, dude, it's not even that, bro. It's 5G, bro. It's 5G radiation. That's what's causing the effects, right? And like the virus is just like, dude, shut the fuck up. You were killing our case right now, you know? So yeah, you definitely want to ask the questions, but you got to be discerning about it. Very, very discerning about it. And most people aren't capable of critical thinking. So there's that.
Yeah,
Just get me wound up, man. Just turn me loose. I'm gonna go.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's when they can tie the legitimate conspiracies, it's an easy scapegoat to be like, yeah, but this is also part of your group, and that's actually just crazy talk. So that means you're crazy for being associated with it.
There you go, man. Guilt by association works every time, you know. I mean, there's people I just want to choke them, you know. Again, Occam's razor, it's the one that requires the least speculation, and there's plenty of stuff out there. There's plenty of stuff out there that's perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. Questions that should be asked, they're begging to be asked. But instead, we're going to go with, you know, like on the egg thing. Oh my God, here's the recent example.
Back on the eggs. Tell me all about these eggs, because
well, you know, again, it speaks to the difference between, you know, plausible and David Icke nut job shit. Like you had. Here's what's plausible. Okay, what's plausible is you have evidence of a particular kind of feed shutting down egg production. You've got dozens and hundreds of farmers out there saying we started using these feeds and our chickens stopped laying. Right? There's something plausible. There's something tangible. There's something you can work with. You've got all of these mysterious accidents going on at food processing facilities all over the world. That's something tangible. That's something trackable. That's something you can work with, right? Mm-hmm. But no. Instead, they decided to go with, well, there's a particular protein in eggs that makes people immune to, which first of all, it's not even what the damn study said, right? But, you know, there's this, no, man, we saw this thing where they did an extract of a protein from eggs and it like prevented mRNA from like bonding to cells and stuff. So that's why they don't want people to have eggs, because it's making people immune to the depopulation effect. It's like, oh my God. All this perfectly tangible, provable, demonstrable stuff out here, and you're going to go with the nut job shit. Why are you doing that? Probably because you did a dab, whatever. You know, because when you're pliable like that, you could, oh yeah, bro, that's like totally plausible, bro. Totally. Anyway. Nah, man. Here's what's going on. And again, your speculation is just as good as mine. There are definite problems with the feed causing chickens to stop laying. That's documented.
And now, do they just have this feed because it's cheaper to make, or are they intentionally trying to change?
And that's where we get into the speculation. See, nobody knows. Yeah. It's a question worth asking. It's a question worth digging into. But nobody really knows. And anybody who tells you that they do have the answers, God, you know, run. You know, myself included. You ever catch me out here like doing a dab and telling you, no, bro, I figured it all out. Run. Something is wrong with the Reverend. I've been hijacked by one of those Invasion of the Body Snatchers pod people. Just run. Supply chain issues is a big part of it. The accidents that are happening at the processing facilities. I mean, we literally just had one up in the Northeast where literally 120,000 chickens got burned up in a fire, you know, at one of these processing plants. It's like, Jesus, man, you know, this is happening all over the place. We had 2 plane crashes at food processing facilities within a span of a week.
Wow.
And nobody even raised an eyebrow. There's a lot more going on, and I'm not buying, again, we always know the official story is bullshit. What's the official story? Well, supply chain issues. Okay, fine. Supply chain issues definitely play into it. It's going to have a measurable effect on it, but why haven't we taken steps to fix those supply chain issues? There's the first question that I have on that front. Secondly, avian flu. You know, the virus. Avian flu. Oh, it's avian flu, man. It's avian flu. All right, cool. Well, it seems to me like if you're having to kill off all of these chickens because of avian flu, it would probably affect the price of chicken, wouldn't it? And yet, plenty of chicken, I notice, is back down to pre-inflation levels of, you know, like $1.99 a pound at Winco up the street here. But yet the egg thing, you know.
That's funny. I never thought about that. There was never a chicken breast shortage.
Right. Never. It was right there.
Always been stocked the rotisseries.
Yeah, always. And you know what? The prices haven't even spiked, you know. I mean, maybe $1 or $2 here, but that's something you can attribute to inflation. which is at record levels, but that's another whole rabbit hole. Again, it's there's no official explanation that makes any sense. So you got to start asking yourself, well, that's here's some speculation. Like it's easy to speculate and say, well, eggs are cheap protein for the working class. That would be one, left-wing capitalism is bad speculation. I don't happen to believe that, but that's, it's definitely a question worth asking. Supply chain issues, again, sure, but why haven't we done anything to address those supply chain issues? Instead, we're tightening up even more regulation. I think what it all works towards eventually, whether they mean to or not, again, money protecting money, power protecting power. What do they want? Control, right? Boom, lock everybody down. Everything plays into that control grid. Why are they trying to regulate gas stoves? And why are they fighting? So what? That's another beauty of it. It's like, well, that's not happening, but we're glad that it is, kind of thing. They do that with like gas stoves, classic example. They're not trying to regulate that, but it's good that they are. Dude, you admitted it. Like the EPA came out and said we're going to regulate gas stoves. Gaslighting. I hate that. Gaslighting is just like the worst thing in the world. Who are you going to believe? The government or your own lying eyes? It's like, bro, dude, my eyes, okay? My eyes. And I don't think that makes me a bad person. They don't want the fossil fuels, right? Because that's something that's going to be difficult for them to control. They don't want for people to go totally off the grid, but they want people to be dependent on the electrical grid because it's something that they can control. If you really, really wanted to eliminate fossil fuels, what would you be pushing? Well, you'd be pushing one particular fellow that I happen to have a man crush on, full disclosure, Elon Musk. You'd be pushing everything that he's doing, right? With regard to the electric cars, but particularly with the power wall, right? The Tesla Powerwall, those battery cell, those battery cell arrays that you keep inside. You got solar panels on the roof, feeding that in. You can tie it to the grid where it's feeding back into the grid or taking a little bit from the grid when it needs it, but giving you the possibility to pull yourself completely off the grid at any time. That's the way you minimize consumption. That's the way. But why won't they push for that? In fact, several states are penalizing people for putting solar panels on their roof. Why?
Really?
Why? I thought the concern was the environment. I thought the concern was, climate change. Why would you be penalizing? Because it gives them the ability to go off grid. And if you're not tied to the grid, you can't be forced to do what they say. Again, look at potential scenarios in the future. We're going to mandate that you take the latest clot shot. Well, no, I'm not going to do that. Okay, well, cool. If you can't provide proof that you've done that, then we're just going to shut off your power. Oh, the government would never do that. Only they did. During the COVID pandemic, they did something very close to that. Governor Gavin Newsom, even though it wasn't about the vaccine mandate, the lockdowns where they were telling people, stay in your houses, you cannot gather in groups larger than this in any particular house. Gavin Newsom actually put before the California legislature that anybody who was caught violating those rules would have their power and their water shut off.
Jeez.
So, if you doubt what these people are willing to do, and this is another thing, quotable Bart, Volume 1, you can tell me I don't happen to believe that in this case our government did this thing. You can tell me that, and I'll accept that. We can have that discussion. But if you tell me our government isn't capable of doing such a thing, I will call bullshit immediately. I will throw hands over that shit because that is just pure. It's either ignorance or stupidity. Ignorance you can fix with a little bit of knowledge. But if you're that willfully blind that you doubt what our government is capable of, let me just throw some things out for you. There was a Japanese unit, 731, right? Basic first aid, and that when you're bringing somebody back from frostbite, that you put their hand in water that is above this temperature but below this temperature, right? That. How do we know that? Because of human experiments that were conducted by Japanese doctors during World War II on Chinese peasant farmers and American prisoners of war. It was a unit called 731. You guys can Google that, Unit 731. And every single one of those Japanese doctors was given a full pardon at the end of the war in exchange for their research.
Wow.
Brought to the United States, put to work for American medical companies, right? I'll give you the easy one. Our space program, Werner von Braun, who was head of NASA for a while, he was actually a member of the SS. He was a Nazi war criminal. And at the end of the war, under Operation Paperclip, they brought all those Nazi scientists. The reason why we beat the Soviets in the space race was because our Nazis were better than their Nazis. So don't tell me what our government is capable of. Our government has fed oatmeal laced with radioactive isotopes to retarded kids as part of medical experiments. Our government has deliberately exposed, and this is all declassified, right? This is not tinfoil hat. It's another quotable Bart. Everything's tinfoil hat until it's declassified, right? We deliberately expose people to LSD without their consent, right? The record is long and the body count is high. So, you can choose to believe, if you want, that in this particular instance, our government or the corporations didn't do this particular thing. We can have that discussion. But don't tell me that they're not capable of it, because they're capable of 10 times that bad.
Yeah, and that's only the stuff that is declassified.
Correct, exactly. That's the stuff we know about.
What's going to come out 10 years from now from 10, 20 years ago?
Jesus. It's going to be a nightmare. I shudder. I shudder at the thought of what your generation is going to have to contend with the momentum that's already built up. I mean, you got to think about it, man. I'm 53. Another 20, 30 years, I'll be dead and gone, man. You're still going to be dealing with the backlash of all of these things. Mm-hmm. And your kids are going to be dealing with the backlash of all of these things. We are at a very vital tipping point right here, because America, without getting on too much of a flag-waving bandwagon here, America is the last bastion of individual liberty. We are the last bastion of the West. Keep in mind, it was Western civilization that gave us the sovereignty of the individual. It was Western civilization that gave us, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, personal autonomy, personal responsibility. It was the West that gave us all of these things. And all of those bastions of Western civilization are currently under assault. You have college-educated kids that are spewing Marxist rhetoric in spite of a body count of over 200 million just in the last century. That Marxism and socialism is something that we should strive for, that capitalism is bad, that freedom of speech is bad, that we are oppressive, that nothing good has ever come out of the United States. Man, we have our fuck-ups. Of course we have our fuck-ups. As I was saying earlier, heroic men have heroic flaws. Heroic civilizations have heroic flaws. We have done some horrible shit, historically speaking. Horrible stuff. That puts us in a club. That club is called everyone, right? But if you look at it on balance, the good that we have brought and that all those Western values have brought to the world, capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any other economic system on the planet. That's not something that I'm spewing. That's documented. Mm-hmm. Documented, right? We we are the light. Much like Rome was the light in the early days of her fall. My fear is that if we lose those values of Western civilization this time around, that there'll be nothing to bring it back. That we will enter a dark ages, the likes of which you couldn't imagine in your most dystopian nightmares. And I worry about that. I really worry about that. Again, I'll be dead and gone. But for you and for your kids, holy shit, man, it's a pretty terrifying prospect.
Do you have any kind of bold predictions for what life is going to look like within the next 20, 30 years? And also, you said you grew up kind of with a generation that had a fear of nuclear war and nuclear attacks. Do you feel anything like that coming back around? And do you think there's any potential for actual nuclear war again?
I like that you asked that as a two-part question. I'm going to address the second part first, because without the second part being addressed, the first part doesn't matter. What the next 20 or 30 years is going to look like is going to depend almost entirely on what happens in the next 10. Okay. Yes, my generation was terrified of a nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union. Now, because of our president being compromised to Ukraine, you can look up Burisma. You know Burisma, where Hunter Biden was making anyway. So that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. But suffices to say, our president is entirely compromised on Ukraine, and sadly, a lot of alleged Republicans are following him down that rabbit hole. Everybody is, we stand with Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine. Let me be the first to say, I don't. Zelensky is a horrible human being. Ukraine is the most corrupt country on that fucking continent. And real quick factoid. We have now given Zelensky $150 billion. $150 billion military aid. Do you want to know what Russia's entire military budget was for last year? Again, this is just one of those little factoids. $78 billion. 78 billion. Wow. So we have given Zelensky at this point roughly twice what Russia spent on their entire military. And we've achieved a stalemate on the battlefield. Again, I have questions. Okay. But here's the scary part about that. Regardless of how we got there, we are literally butting up against the potential of a nuclear exchange. And this is the first time that I have seen that since those high school days in the Reagan era. So for me, it's definitely an ass clincher. Do I really think that we will hit that tipping point and go over? In my heart of hearts, I really don't believe that we will. But the fact that we can't rule it out, and the fact that we are this close again after 20 plus years removed from that possibility is a pretty terrifying prospect, man. Because now, again, your generation doesn't, I mean, we were acutely aware of it. We had the duck and cover drills. We had television movies like The Day After and Threads, which if you haven't seen it, you should probably look that up if you're not like up to snuff on nuclear fear. Threads and The Day After and Testament, and we had films like that. It was constantly there. Like, we knew it. This could go, man, like anytime, and it could start simple, and and again, even back then we thought it would probably start in Europe because somebody was pushing across a certain border and somebody fought back, and one guy just thought, okay, well, just one, just one. Oh, did they hit? Well, we got to hit them back, boom. Yeah. But just one. And then it's two, and then we got a full-bore nuclear exchange, and then everybody goes. And look at where we're living right now, man. Look at where we're living. Fairchild Air Force Base right up the road. That's the headquarters of the Air Refueling Wing. They're the guys that keep the B-52s in the air 24 hours a day at their fail-safe points right now, by the way. For a while, we were ringed with Atlas missile silos. Those have since been decommissioned. But we're still a hot target right here in Spokane.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, people don't even realize that. And keep in mind, if they hit Fairchild, they've got to hit GEG as well. Because, if the B-52s can land at Fairchild, you knock out Fairchild, they can still land on the airfield at GEG. It's a commercial airport, but they can still land there. Mm-hmm. So if you hit one, you got to hit the other. Yeah. It's a frightening prospect. I mean, not so much for me. I got a bomb shelter, but, and right now, everybody's going, dude, get his address. Yeah, we could go there. It may just be confirmation bias on my part. The fact that we managed to duck it for 50 plus years makes me believe that we will somehow get around it again. But there are no guarantees. Yeah. And even if we get past this, again, to the first part of your question, what are the predictions of what it could look like in the next 30, 40 years is all going to depend on what happens in the next 10. And that is all going to depend on what we decide to do as a culture, as a nation. Reagan even said that. Reagan was talking to a guy who was a Cuban refugee. He was like, wow. He was just like, man, I just can't imagine the struggle. He was like, struggle. He was like, we were lucky. We were lucky because we had America to come to. If America goes, nobody's got any place to go. So we are going to have to make some hard decisions. And those decisions are going to have to be made on practicality. Those decisions are going to have to be made on reality rather than emotion. They're going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, and a lot of people are not going to like the outcome. And I don't fucking care, because without us, it all goes. Period. End of statement. Done. If America falls, Western civilization falls with her, and all of our species is going to be plunged into darkness. And we're not looking at 30, 40 years. We're looking at centuries, man. Yeah. Look what happened after the fall of Rome. Look what happened after the fall of Rome. Going into the Dark Ages? Jesus, bro. Now, and Rome was the most technologically advanced civilization that we knew of at the time. Mm-hmm. And it collapsed and sent us into the Dark Ages. Imagine what the nature of the collapse will be now. Now that we have comforts like, we turn on a switch, we flip a switch, the lights come on. We open a spigot, water comes out. And it's a reasonable certainty that water doesn't contain diseases that are going to kill you, mm-hmm. right? We have flush toilets, indoor plumbing, electricity, power grid, all of these things we have, all these comforts. We don't have, as a species, we don't have the skills anymore to survive without it. Here's the irony of it. If it comes to that, Elijah, the irony of it is the places that are the most backward shitholes on earth are actually going to come out better than we will. Because, for them, a day without power is just another day. Mm-hmm. A day where you got to shit in your own backyard is just another day. Sub-Saharan Africa is going to do great. They're going to do fantastic. Europe is fucked. We're fucked. Every technologically advanced industrialized civilization is fucked. So, yeah, it's a scary thought, man. It's a scary thought.
So what do you think it's going to take for America to come together and kind of get moving in the right direction again, if that's even possible? Or what can people do to just come together and realize that we're all a part of the same team and quit all this bullshit of everything?
That is an excellent question. That is an excellent question and a very well phrased question. First part, do I think we even can come together? Yeah, I believe we can. We are the most polarized that we have been as a nation since the first Civil War. Okay. But the difference is you have specific cultural powers that are pushing that polarization now. The polarization that happened between the North and the South during the first Civil War happened pretty much organically. You had cultures who were clashing that had different values, and eventually momentum just took over, and that's what happened. Now you have cultural forces that are actually pushing that separation because they have an agenda. What is it going to take for us all to come together? It's going to take being able to have discussions, literal discussions. It's going to take a resurgence in critical thought, being able to think critically. Bongino is always saying this, that the difference is we think that they are people with bad ideas. They think that we are bad people with ideas. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to understand that we're not going to agree on everything. We're going to have to understand that sometimes your feelings have to take the fucking back seat. The problem is you've got people who are deeply, deeply invested in us being this polarized. It's going to take an awakening, all right? I mean, long story short, it's going to take an awakening. Are we capable of it? Yes, we're capable of it. We have survived worse as a nation and as a culture. We survived an onslaught. Keep in mind how we came into being, right? This nation came into being, and nobody thought that the colonies had a chance. It was 13 colonies and a bunch of ragtag militia guys bringing private cannons to the battlefield to fight what was, at the time, the largest, most powerful military machine on the planet. And we won. Crawled out from under them. British hadn't had enough. So in 1812, they came back and said, you know what, man, we want a rematch. And we whipped their asses again, right? We have survived arguably one of the bloodiest civil wars in history, where family members fought family members over the polarization between cultures. Think about the number of people that were killed at Antietam. One single battle in the Civil War. It's unspeakable the amount of carnage and stuff that was wrought on this nation, and yet we survived. We pulled it together. We survived World War One. We survived the Great Depression. We've survived any number of economic recessions. We basically became the armory for the world throughout post-World War II. At the beginning of World War II, we had nothing with regard to being on an economy with a war footing. And in less than 5 years, we completely retooled our economy and put us on that war footing. And we're instrumental. Got to give the Russians credit in Europe, sorry, but we were instrumental in winning the Second World War, right? Then we kind of lost our way, but we still survived. We've still managed to persevere. We survived the 60s. You want to talk about civilian uprising and unrest? Oh my God, we survived 1968, which is still referred to by historians as the year of the trip hammer because of all the chaos and carnage that went down that. Right.
What does that mean? What was going on around then?
Oh man, you got to take MLK assassinated. Robert Kennedy assassinated. Riots in every major U.S. city. The Vietnam War, the anti-war movement, the Weather Underground, and communist infiltration at our universities. Bombings at the Pentagon and other government buildings by the Weather Underground, and now they're college professors. Oh wow. It's just we have survived worse, man. We have survived worse. I refuse to do that. I refuse to be black-pilled, man. I refuse to do that. Oh man, our best days are behind us, bro. Game over, man. Game over. I'm not that guy. I'm not. But it's gonna have to get ugly, man. It's gonna have to get ugly. I'll give you one more. I'll give you one more from the quotable Bart, right? I'll give you one more from the quotable Bart. I have always stated that we are in a perpetual race between enlightenment and catastrophe. And it may take catastrophe to bring us to enlightenment. I'm totally okay with that.
As long as we make it out to the other side, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what are some of the things you do? You said you have a bomb shelter. I see a bunch of your videos, and you got the prepping supplies and all the guns you can need and all the knowledge you need. Give us some of your background and experience and what you do to actually set yourself up for success in worst case scenario situations.
Right on. Excellent question. Part of that goes back to my roots as a scared little kid with all the nuclear stuff going on in the Reagan era. That's actually what started my passion for prepping. My parents thought I was nuts, because all of a sudden I'm on all these mailing lists and they're getting pamphlets for freeze dried, survival food from Mountain House and stuff. Go, what the hell is all this? Dad, you don't understand, man. There's going to be a nuclear exchange. We got to be dug in. We need to do something about the basement, man. We got to set aside a quarter and I'll help you lay the bricks. Yeah, my parents just thought I was nuts, and they were right. To a greater or lesser degree, they were right. But I was obsessed with it, man. I started reading books like books from Mel Tappan, Tappan on Survival, Tappan, like the oven. Mel Tappan, Tappan on Survival was one that I had. Dr. Bruce Clayton, Life After Doomsday was the name of his book. And I just read everything that I could get my hands on. And, all the list, stuff from Kurt Saxon, Poor Man's James Bond, that kind of stuff, just lists of different survival gear, things from the government, man, Civil Defense Authority and things like that were telling you, okay, if you want to be prepared, you have to have this set aside. And gradually that just almost became a spiritual path for me. You know what I mean? There is a gentleman by the name of James Wesley Rawls, and I consider myself, as survivalism goes, and I'm still comfortable with the term survivalist. A lot of people don't like that term. A lot of people have gone to prepper because survivalist kind of has an image around it. I'm okay with that. I'm not put off by that at all. But I consider myself a Rawlsian survivalist. Rawls is basically the heir to Mel Tappan and Bruce Clayton and the old school of the survival movement. He's got a website called survivalblog.com. Really good advice across the board, and his precepts are very solid. I had adopted those precepts before I even knew who James Wesley Rawls was, though, man. You got to have your 3 Bs, your beans, your bullets, and your Band-Aids. And I added a 4th B to that, your bleach, right? Which is like your soap and your disinfectants, your antibacterials and actual bleach and things like that. There are a lot of people out there right now that are starting to see what is going on. And I've been warning, I mean, God, as long as, I mean, you've known me since, 2013. So that's 10 years you've been hearing me rant and rave about this insane shit. People who have known me longer than that, they've been hearing it forever. And I think they politely tolerated me for a long time. But now they're like, oh, shit.
He's onto something.
Yeah, it's like I'm right back in high school again. Bart's always talking about that crazy stuff. Oh, shit, he was right. But, a lot of people feel overwhelmed. A lot of people feel overwhelmed. Don't let our current status get overwhelmed. You're very late. If you guys are paying attention, you guys are very late to the party, but there's still ways, and I go into a lot of those tips, like on that Sunday sermon, I go into a lot of that stuff. I'm constantly giving tips for people, particularly for people who are late to the ball game or late to the party. Like, how can I get my house prepared? It doesn't take much, man. Again, your beans, your bullets, your Band-Aids. It doesn't take much. You get your beans, your bullets, and your Band-Aids and your bleach. Get that squared away, man. Food can be easy. Rice is cheap still. Rolled oats are cheap still. Your bullets. You can still get guns. You might not be able to get the ones that you want if you live here in Washington State. But a good 12-gauge shotgun will carry you a long way. Your Band-Aids, you want to have first aid supplies. And when I say first aid supplies, I mean, yes, I'm talking literal Band-Aids, but you want to have things like Quick Clot and Celox and things like that and military grade tourniquets, because bad things happen and there might not be a doctor. Don't get overwhelmed, man. The one thing you don't want to do is get to where, again, being black-pilled like so many people are. It's like, well, if it happens, I just hope I die in the first wave, man. I just want to be, why do I want to go on? Well, I'll tell you why you want to go on. Because if you don't die in the first wave, I want you to think about the prospect of your little girl tugging on the leg of your jeans going, Daddy, why does my tummy hurt? When you know that the answer is because you haven't eaten in 5 days, right? It might not come quick for you. And starvation is a hell of a way to go, let alone the things that the mob is capable of. If they find you and your family and you've got no means of defense and you've got no, I mean, it's horrible. Don't let it get overwhelming. Take a look at Survival Blog, first of all. And for the people that want to check out my program, because I'm constantly giving in fact, right after the Ohio thing, I just posted to my personal page some advice on gas masks, because some people had asked me about it. They're like, dude, hey, man, I hadn't really thought about it, and I thought you were crazy, but after this Ohio thing, where do I go for a gas mask? Bart Stewart is the personal page, okay? I don't do a whole lot of political stuff on that. What you're going to want to check out is Reverend Bart's America. Reverend Bart's America is my fan page on Facebook. That's where I handle most of the survival stuff. That's where I handle most of the political stuff. And I'm also on YouTube. I have the Reverend Bart channel on YouTube. Twitter feed is all tied to that. I'm on BitChute. I'm on Rumble. But Reverend Bart's America on Facebook, that's where they're going to find the bulk of that stuff. And if they want to, man, they can message me personally. I don't mind giving advice, man. I don't mind giving advice. And I will also, I mean, something that I do semi-professionally is I will come out, and again, this part isn't going to be for free, folks, but if somebody wants to throw down some cash, I'm more than happy to walk them through the process. I will take a day, I will take a day and come out to somebody's place and we can go to the store together and I will show them, hey, this is what I do. And we can spend an hour in front of eBay and, look on here, pick this, and this. I take a walk around their house. Okay, this is not really defensible. This is your best bet, blah, blah, blah. Whether you want to bug in or bug out. That's cool thing about my spot is I have the luxury of both. But yeah, I'm always happy to spread the knowledge on that, because at the end of the day, man, hey, I mean, I might go in the first wave. You never know, man. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't be prepared for everything. Like, I'm dug in like an Alabama tick, man. I got, 2 years worth of food supply and, guns, ammo, everything else. And a meteor could fall on my house. You know what I mean? Or some leak from Hanford, down the road. Some radioactive leak from Hanford could happen while I'm 2 hours away from the house and don't have access to my potassium iodate pills to, make sure my thyroid doesn't take on all that cesium. So, I mean, there's always, there's never 100%. You're never 100%. All you can do is put as many of the odds as possible in your favor and just hope for the best, man. That's it. But the one thing you don't want to do is get overwhelmed. Hopelessness. If you were living without, you can die, right? You can die in 3 minutes, right? Without air, right? You can die, it's the rule of threes. You can die in 3 minutes without air. You can die in 3 hours without shelter, right? You can die in, 3 days without water. You can die in 3 weeks without food. You can die in 3 seconds without thinking, right? And you can die 3 times quicker than you need to if you have no hope, right? Now, hope might be a misnomer because just blind hope is the last refuge of the desperate, right? But there's a difference between blind hope and having an understanding that you are a lot more capable than you think you are. If you believe you can get through it, or if you believe you can't get through it, you're right.
Yeah.
So hopefully people will at least find a way to find that strength within themselves. Find something to latch onto. If not yourself, your kids. If not your kids, the people that love you. Find some motivating factor. But yeah.
Cool. That was great. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we wrap this up?
Speaking of rules of threes, I'm going to give you the 3 prime directives, and I give you guys this at the end of every one of the Sunday sermons. And the hashtag, live the 3, okay? They will try to bury you. The signal to noise ratio, right, in the culture right now is all fucked up. They will try to bury you with the noise. You have got to strive to be that signal that breaks through the noise. They will try to bury you with darkness, right? They will try to demoralize, dehumanize, emasculate you with darkness. You have got to be that light that breaks through the darkness, but above and beyond anything else, you have to be the strength that breaks through the weakness. Because without the strength, being the signal or the light won't matter. If you don't have the strength, you can't push the signal. If you don't have the strength, you can't carry the light. So be the signal, not the noise, the light, not the darkness, and the strength, not the weakness. That's it.
Very well said. We could go on for hours and hours.
Yeah, we could.
But that was great. Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge.
I appreciate you having me on, man. Thank you. And by the way, man, stick with this guy's work because he's doing some really fantastic things. I appreciate you having me on, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody, make sure you go check him out. He's dropping knowledge every Sunday on the YouTube Live. You can go catch him. Catch us both at Northern Quest next Excite Fight, and come say what's up. Until then,
I'll be around.
We'll see you next time. Deuces.
Thanks, guys.